Let's begin this afternoon by taking a look at who's looking at you, or may potentially be. We told you earlier in the week about a report by Wired magazine that outlined the details of a spy center in a small town called Bluffdale, Utah. And its purpose is to intercept, analyze, and store vast swaths of the world's communications from international, foreign, and domestic networks. Now, the article states that the NSA has turned its surveillance apparatus on the U.S. and its citizens, including the eavesdropping of domestic phone calls and the intercepting of domestic emails. And this week, there was a rare occurrence. The NSA chief actually testified in front of Congress and took questions about the NSA ability, both legally and physically, to spy on U.S. citizens. While dancing around some of the facts, General Keith Alexander, for the most part, denied that this is happening. But there's evidence that shows otherwise, and many people who believe otherwise. One of those people is Trevor Tim, an activist with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He's in San Francisco to help us sift through some of this. Hey there, Trevor. Do you have a reason to believe that the NSA is, in fact, spying on U.S. citizens?
Well, we've actually known for quite a few years that this has been going on. This story first emerged in the New York Times in 2005 when they first revealed that the Bush administration had been instituting this massive warrantless wiretapping program, basically skirting the law and skirting the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. Since then, many other news organizations have reported on it, from USA Today to the New Yorker to the Los Angeles Times. And more evidence has come out that the NSA has these wiretapping centers, or these monitoring centers, located throughout the country in the country's largest telecom companies like AT&T and Verizon, and they're sucking up all of the communications, whether it's overseas or U.S. citizens. Now, the NSA will claim that they only go after overseas non-U.S. citizens who are suspected of terrorism. But the evidence so far has shown that is not the case, and they're actually sucking up massive amounts of communications of innocent Americans and basically trying to catalog the whole internet.
Let me play something from the hearing that took place earlier in this week, just to get a sense of some of the concerns that are out there.
If Dick Cheney were elected president and wanted to detain and incessantly waterboard every American who sent an email making fun of his well-known hunting mishaps, what I'd like to know is, does the NSA have the technological capacity to identify those Cheney bashers based upon the content of their emails? Yes or no?
No.
So General Alexander goes on to explain that assuming those emails are in the United States, the NSA does not have the ability to do that. That in the U.S., the NSA would have to go through the FBI to get a warrant, sort of deflecting responsibility here. What's your read, Trevor, between the lines? Obviously, this is a fake scenario that this congressman was sort of making up for the sake of argument, but there's denials and denials there at this hearing. What do you think?
Well, there's actually two interesting things about his denial. First, they've been denying essentially that they've been doing this for years. But what makes this really absurd is that they actually have secret definitions of a few words that make these denials very easy. It's kind of funny to think that they have a top secret document that actually gives them definitions, but Bamford has reported on this as well. Definitions like intercept and collect. What they mean by that is, or what normal people like you and I or anybody else would think is intercept is collect, is if their monitoring centers are collecting our emails and storing it in their data centers in the NSA facility like in Utah, that's collecting. But under their definition, they only think collecting as something that is processed into what they call intelligible form for humans. So these scanners that they have can scan keywords for emails and then send it back to humans, and they don't count it as collecting until it gets to the human person.
So you're saying they sort of have a whole different kind of language that it's okay to use, and even though the rest of us think they mean something different, they actually understand each other just within the NSA, perhaps.
Right. That's why it's so hard to question them, because you can say, "Are you collecting people's emails?" and they'll say no when they're using their secret definition of the word collect. And when everybody else is interpreting collect as the regular definition. Now, the most interesting part is that later on, after the clip that you showed, Hank Johnson asked if they just had the ability to do this, not whether they're actually doing it. And that's where the denial gets really interesting, because Keith Alexander actually says that they don't even have the ability. And, you know, we know with actual proof and evidence that that's not true. A whistleblower named Mark Klein came to EFF in 2006 and gave us detailed blueprints and evidence that there's a room in AT&T down the street in San Francisco, actually, that holds a secret wiretapping room that the NSA is sucking up all of these communications. Later on, USA Today came out with an article explaining that actually all telecom companies have similar situations set up in their companies, and that the NSA was collecting all sorts of communications, whether it was U.S. citizens or overseas, and they could have easily set this up so where they only got overseas communications, but they purposely went to all of these companies, even some in the middle of the U.S. where obviously it's just domestic communications, and they are now, we think, transferring, when this data center in Utah is finished, they're going to transfer all this information and store it on their servers for data mining in the future.
Well, going on what you said, Trevor, I mean, I guess it depends on what the definition of ability is. Do they have the legal ability? No. Does that mean that they don't have the physical ability? That could be something different. I think it's important to kind of hone in on, like you say, the meaning of these words. Let me talk to you about something else, something that changed just as of yesterday. U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder gave the National Counterterrorism Center license to retain America's data for up to 5 years, even if the subjects in question are not suspected of having ties to terrorism. Now, of course, it's not totally clear what the NTC has access to and what it doesn't, but I'm wondering what you've discovered sort of in your research that this could all mean.
Yeah, this was really disturbing because as it stands now, the government can hold private information for 180 days. And now Eric Holder is saying that now we can hold it for 5 years. And not only that, but they can share it between agencies. So this was meant to stop terrorism like a lot of other laws. And the Counterterrorism Center, the National Counterterrorism Center, has access to this information, but it can also be spread throughout other agencies, and everybody's going to have access to it. So it's just another massive privacy violation in the name of stopping terrorism. We've seen this countless times where the U.S. government is using terrorism as an excuse to invade people's privacy. You know, this warrantless wiretapping situation is one. These new guidelines are another. And the Patriot Act, which was obviously passed under the guise of stopping terrorism, ends up being used 99% of the time for crimes that have nothing to do with terrorism, that may be minor crimes like drug crimes or targeting innocent people. So it's just part of a pattern where the U.S. government is still using terrorism as kind of a scare tactic to pass these laws that otherwise would obviously skirt the Constitution.
Certainly, we will keep our eyes on, it seems like every couple days something new comes out related to this. Trevor Timm, an activist with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, joining us from San Francisco.